What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Corporate Bartender. You know, I said last time that the killer episodes just keep piling up. It's true. They do. And today's episode is just cracking. Cracking what? Cracking the leadership code. We're talking about connection, communication, and collaboration. And we've got Alain Hunkins on the program today, and the conversation is pretty darn epic. If you don't know Alain, no worries, we've got you covered. He's a facilitator, coach, and leadership expert with decades of experience. He's also the author of Cracking the Leadership Code, 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. This conversation was fantastic, and I think you're going to dig it. So buckle up, TCBers, grab your favorite cocktail, and let's get right on into it with Alain Hunkins on today's TCB.
Welcome to Sky Team's The Corporate Bartender, where we gather some of the best HR and people leaders to discuss what's happening on the people side of business. Now pull up a stool, belly up to the bar, and join us for The Corporate Bartender.
All right, welcome everybody. It is Wednesday. It's your favorite day and mine. It is Corporate Bartender Day. It is the 19th of July, 2023, and the 174th time we've convened this group of awesome people. I know, let's celebrate that, shall we? That's a little preview, Alain, because when we introduce you, we're going to dance you on, because that's how we do it here.
Perfect. 174 is my favorite number, too.
See? It was your number. It was your number in football when you were a kid, right?
Oh, the shit is starting to pile up already. Let me find my pointers.
I love it. Today's going to be a fun day. We've got a guest on the show. We've got Alain Hunkins. He is the author of this book right here, Cracking the Leadership Code. And I love books that have numbers in the title. 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. So we're going to ask him to share the secrets with us and share a little bit about why that book and what makes that book different than all the gajillion of other boring business books out there on the market today. Speaking of boring business books, hey, here's one. It's called You, Me, We, Why We All Need a Friend at Work and How to Show Up as One. And I keep asking, even when Morag isn't here, I ask the question. Please, if you have not purchased your copy, do so. And if you have, do us a favor and write us a review on Amazon, because we are creeping steadily towards some sort of magical number. 100 reviews is magic, and it changes the algorithm. I don't know what happens. I think it's just they're saying that to me to keep me interested in pimping for reviews. We've got some guests upcoming. We've got Jeff Eschleman on August 9th. He is a coach who has a framework for helping executives create a lifestyle where success and harmony coexist. So I'm looking forward to digging into that. Getting into September, we've got Dr. Brian Smith, the author of Positive Influence, Be the I in Team. I'm interested in this because the only picture I've ever seen exemplifying what the I in team is, I use it in some workshops. It shows team written in block letters, and it says, there it is. There's the I in team. It's trapped in the A hole because it's in the inside of the A. You can bet I'll be including that image when Brian's on the show. And then this show, I am super excited about this. On September 13th, Buki Musaku is going to be here, and he's the author of a book called I Don't Understand, Navigating Unconscious Bias in the Workplace. But the hook that interested me was the research that he's done on reverse bias. Right? So reverse bias, thinking about when a minority misinterprets unfavorable decisions or behaviors as unconscious bias when they're not. Like presuming a potential client or colleague has a problem with your accent, when in reality, it's you that are nervous about your own accent. When a minority sees unconscious discrimination at not being shortlisted, when simply they didn't meet the requirements, right? So all these things that we've talked about in all of the DE&I conversations that we've had here, I got the pitch on this one, and I was like, those are questions that I would never ask.
Mm-hmm.
And he has created a lane in which he's done research and is excited to talk about it. He's located in the UK. So when I responded to his publicist, I said, hey, we do the show kind of live and it's at 4:00 and that's 11 p.m. in the UK. Is he down for doing something like that? And he is. So he's going to be late nighting it with us here on September 13th. So looking forward to that.
He'll be already be drunk when he gets to the bar.
Excellent. Even better. Even better. Even better. All right. So today we've got our guest. His name is Alain Hunkins. Will you say your name first? Because I know we all struggle with trying to say your Belgian name.
You say it so well, though, Eric. I was just thinking that was really quite well said. Yeah, Alain, you said it really well.
I've been practicing.
It shows. You're polished. It's great. It's Alain. And if anyone ever needs a brush up, just go to my LinkedIn profile. There's an audio tutorial. I repeated about 3 times there, and that should take care of you. Yeah, it's a totally common French name. My mom is a French-speaking. First language is French. She grew up in Belgium, so yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I have an older brother named Serge. These are very common names. Not so common here. That's all.
Yeah.
Right. Alan and Scott would be your names here, probably.
Yes, exactly.
Well, let's welcome Alain Hunkins here to the bartender with the dance on. You got the preview. You knew it was coming. It is time to do the dance on. So thank you for being with us today. We are so excited to have you here. I've had the book for a while, and I've used it. We're actually using it in a couple of programs. You're going to be a special master class facilitator for us on a couple of programs. So super stoked about it. I love it. So I want to get into that with you.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get into any of that current content type stuff, I don't imagine that as a wee child, you said, when I grow up, I want to be a leadership expert, executive coach, and I want to write a book about cracking the leadership code.
Mm-hmm.
So what did you want to be, and how the hell did you get here?
What a good question. What did I want to be? Yeah, it wasn't that for sure. It's interesting because, I think if I look back, I can connect the dots. Certainly when I was moving through it all, there was a lot of let's try the next thing and the next thing. So if I rewind the tape to mix metaphors and follow that thread, I'd say the common denominator, that's the third analogy in one sentence, is just to keep you on your toes here today. The common denominator is I've always been really fascinated by people, what makes people tick and what makes people tick better in certain situations than in other situations. I guess, and if I had to trace it way back, I think it has a lot to do with somewhat of my unique backstory as a child. I mean, we all have our own unique challenges and stories, and so mine. So I grew up in New York City, not particularly unique. I was raised by a single mom and my grandmother, also not particularly unique. The part where it gets, I think, a little bit more flavorful and interesting is the fact that both my mother and my grandmother are Holocaust survivors. My mother's born in 1935 in Belgium. So during the Holocaust, when the Nazis invaded Belgium, my mom is 6.5 years old, and my mom was taken and separated from her mother and put into hiding through the Belgian underground with a woman that she had never met, and spent the next 3.5 years in hiding, given a false name, had her hair dyed blonde. Wow. She was in a convent for a while. I mean, she said, I was the best Catholic in the whole convent. I learned my prayers well. And amazingly, her and her mother both survived the war. My grandmother was actually imprisoned in a concentration camp and was liberated right at the end of the war in Belgium. Mm-hmm. They were reunited, but my mother's father, my grandmother's husband, was killed in the war. Most of the family was killed. Mm-hmm. And I share all that as backstory in that those were my primary parents. And as you can imagine, going through such a traumatic experience completely shaped their worldview. Mm-hmm. Not to mention, there was a certain kind of inextricable, survival fear-based link that my grandmother had with my mother, in that sense of not ever wanting to let her go after that, which is one thing to understand. I think all of us can see that from a distance. it's kind of challenging when that's your mom and your grandmother trying to raise you in New York City in the 1970s and 80s. So all of which to say is what I noticed is that, and at the time, I felt it more than I could have cognitively understood it. What I felt was there was a very different vibe at home than there was anywhere else. There was a very different vibe at my friends' houses. There was a very different vibe. I loved school because school, there was structure, there was order. You do certain things, you get good grades. I was a great student because that everything made sense. Whereas at home, I'd come in the door. I'd never know which version of my grandmother was going to show up. Was it going to be the one who's completely quiet? Was it the one who's going to rage? And again, no harm on, I understand why she comes by it honestly, right? I mean, and so I think for me, so as is often the case, and I've met many other second generation children of children survivors, and there's this sense that you grow up really fast and you also become kind of this old person. Like at the age of 3 and 4, I'm thinking about this stuff because even though it's not being spoken about, there's this implicit understanding that you should be grateful for your life and like just these deep things. So for me, it's like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be happy. I want to be peaceful. It was just like these kind of profound ideas, right? As opposed to like, I want to play for the Yankees. Right. It wasn't like, in some ways. And so my journey then took me, and interestingly, my father, my folks split up when I was 1. My dad's family were all professional musicians, and I became a violinist at the age of 5. And I was really involved with orchestras. I went to the High School of Music and Art in New York City as a violinist. And then I went on to college and I got involved in theater and acting. And I ended up going to a graduate acting conservatory, which is an interesting thing. I think if you ever get a chance, go to acting school because it forces you to put yourself kind of under the microscope in terms of really taking apart, dissecting human behavior. If you think about characters in a play or a movie, you're trying to play someone else. So understanding, like you can work that from the outside in, that is like from the body, the gesture, the voice, or you can work it from the inside out, the psychology, motivation. So just studying all of that really connected to people. And then along the way, while I was in grad school, one of my classmates went off and did this training, this kind of experiential training weekend. And he came back and was a very different person. And watching him over the next 2 years, his name is John. And I thought, I need to do whatever John did. And I went off on this training and it kind of blew my mind. And it was like very empowering. And it sort of, for me, it became this touch point of, this feeling of, I'm going to use the word again, empowerment, the sense of, I can make choices. And I think for me, it was kind of stripping away the veil of unconsciousness that as humans, we have the power to choose how we want to be. One of my favorite quotes comes from Viktor Frankl, which you all know, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And in it, Frankl writes, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is your power to choose. And in that choice lies your freedom. So for me, I guess at its core, what I'm really motivated by is how can I help people to unlock their potential and find more of the spaces, more of the freedom so that we can have more vibrant, alive agency in our lives. Sometimes that's in a for-profit corporational setting. Sometimes it's in a it's all over the place. So my why is ultimately, I want to create a more vibrant and alive world by kindling the fire of brilliance in all people. And I just think that we are all capable of so much. And so I want to help tease out more of what's inside.
I love that.
I have to write down kindling the fire of brilliance.
I just did. It's like,
I love how your experience with music and theater and acting helped, like that lens of understanding behavior. And, we also often hear of industrial psychology or therapy or, all kinds of behavioral science and research. Right. Very pervasive and valid, but wow, that experiential embodying of behaviors and characteristics. And that's a whole different way to understand human behavior and motivation.
It's a whole different, and I love that you brought that up, Lori, too, because I would say another kind of wrinkle in this thing, if you think about, when so often, one of the buzzwords that we use so much in organizational settings is engagement, right? Like talk about whether that's customer engagement or employee engagement, and this holy grail, and how engagement shows all these other different performance metrics. And to me, if you think about the performing arts, if you think about when you buy a ticket to see a rock concert or an opera or a play or a musical or a movie for that matter, what are you paying for? You are paying to be engaged. And the entire craft of the arts is to engage you for every single moment, from the moment the curtain goes up until it goes down, and even sometimes before and after. Yeah. It is that experience that you're having. And if you think about just how in the business world, the bar for engagement is so god awful low, right? Just like, it just is. It just is like, you show up like, hey, it's like, it's just because it's a different mindset. Mm-hmm. And so there's so much. And what's so interesting though, is within that is we all live in this. You're probably familiar with the work of, I forget, Pine and the other author, The Experience Economy, right? That all the world is a stage, right? And so this idea is that we've all been immersed in an experience economy, and to the point where, we will pay a premium to be more engaged. Sure. And so what are you and your organization doing to make sure you're taking all the dead places out, right? Because if you think about what we do in rehearsal in the performing arts, is whether you work a song or you work a script and you rehearse to get it flawless, to take the boring bits out. And unfortunately, too much of business leaves the boring bits in.
Because we don't make leaders sit through long blocking rehearsals.
No, no, it's true.
Well, and Eric, I know you're a musician. I started acting in school, not acting out. There's a difference. Before
you did both of those things, to be clear.
I'm a very shy child, but I took acting, took drama, speech, music, voice training all through college. And you become that role, and you learn a lot about yourself and just your physical self and what it looks like, how to make yourself bigger, how to make yourself smaller. And when the whole imposter theory phraseology came out, it's like, what the hell? I've just been acting a role for 30 years. No, it's not an imposter. It's just the role that I put on when I go into the office.
Right.
And it was never hard. It was just, okay, that's the role
up here. Yeah.
Well, that was the methodology that you employed, right?
Exactly. To this day, I don't like conflict. I don't seek it out. I'm in HR. It walks in my door. Mm-hmm. I don't have to seek it out, right? And okay, my role is I embrace this conflict. Right up until you piss me off, and then the real me comes out.
Laurel, the agitator.
Oh no, I told a guy last week, because I was the neutral person to interview this person from another part of the corporation.
Oh boy.
I did really well for Eric for 22 minutes. Listen to this guy whining about how he was discriminated against. Trying to find out how he was discriminated against. So I was acting, and I was being very kind and empathetic, which I'm not. And he was telling me how, a software engineer, how he could be so much better paid somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And I bit my tongue, and I didn't tell him to please go somewhere else. I was acting in this very supportive role right up until I kept going, what's the origin of the discrimination? Tell me something illegal. And he said, it's because I'm so much better than everybody else.
Oh, unfortunately, not a protected class, better than everyone.
Said, thank you, but it's not discrimination that we pay like crap.
Yeah. That's just poor choices on your part.
Exactly. At that point, he hung up on me, and today he resigned. So we've had a very good outcome from that. Mm-hmm. So now I can be my own self and say, I'm sure it was Machiavellian, but it worked. So I don't know where Machiavelli fits in your story, Elaine, but
right about here.
Yeah. This is how what Eric plans for the conversation, what the speaker says, takes him along the path, and then what Laurel contributes takes him.
It's the twists and turns and forks in the road that make this my favorite meeting of the week. So Lori brought it up, Alain. I wanted to get your sort of official take on it. How has that experience shaped how you show up as a leadership coach these days?
When you say that experience, like all of that experience, that entire journey, which part of the experience?
Yeah, more specifically, the focus on acting and your journey there to learn how to embody a character from the inside out. How has that affected you as a coach?
You just used a really important word, embody. I think it's about embodied presence. You know, I'd been coaching for years, and then I went through the ICF training, and, you know, I look at those competencies about, like, you know, embodied presence, like, oh, this is what I've been doing. So I'd say part of my superpower is my ability to listen and hold space, right? Mm-hmm. I know how to create a safe place for people to feel safe enough to speak up, to be themselves, to get a little bit more, or maybe a lot more honest. And I feel like that is so integral to the coaching relationship. It's so integral to the leader-follower relationship, is, you know, because at its core, what is leadership? It is a relationship, right? It is a subjective relationship that is judged by both sides. But ultimately, the person who has the final say of whether or not this is an effective leadership relationship is the person who chooses to follow. So for me, I'd say the piece around performing, it's also just the need for innate listening, you know, like embodied listening at a deep level. Like you were saying before, like, you know, there's so many different ways. Like as a musician, you're listening to the other players, like, you know, when I was in an orchestra and if I was in the violin section, when the conductor needs to stop and work with the flutes and the oboes, guess what? We all shut up. We don't pull out our phones and start, like, you are there, you are present, and you're trying to understand how what's going on integrates with your part. So it's interesting. I've had a lot of, whether it's podcast hosts or people I've worked with, like, Alain, you're such an integrator and synthesizer. And I think that part of being, you know, what I like about the performing arts, you know, so often in the business world, we use sports as the main analogy for how we describe it. It's a game. And what I really love is this idea of, you know, in the performing arts, there is no winner, or you could say everyone's a winner. I mean, the nature of what we're creating is we're all collaborating to produce this amazing outcome, but it's a different mindset than like winners, losers. You know, I'm the pitcher on the team, you're the first baseman. It isn't quite so linear and left-brained. It's much more intuitive and integrative. So anyway,
I love that so much. I mean, how am I today years old when I realized that is the more apt analogy for teams in a business context than sports?
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that too.
Yeah. There's a wonderful book called The Art of Possibility by Ben Zander. I don't know if you know Ben Zander. He's the conductor. He was the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra, and he's got a bunch of videos. He may be retired now. He's really quirky and eccentric and wonderful. And he would do workshops, and he would get the entire room singing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and he'd do all these things. But one of the things he talks about is, as the conductor, because he came into conducting as kind of this egocentric, I'm in charge, right? Oh. You know this guy?
I read an article about this weekend.
Okay. Yeah. So Ben Zander. So anyway, Ben Zander. So when he became the conductor, what he put index cards on all the musicians in the orchestra, their music stands, and said, I want your feedback. And they're all like, because, you know, traditionally orchestral playing is very dictatorial hierarchy. I mean, what the conductor does goes. In fact, they rated like level. It's funny. They've rated levels of happiness in different professions, and like orchestral player is one of the lowest, because you just don't get a lot of latitude and freedom, and there's not much creativity. It's like basically read them, follow along, and blend in. But anyway, he was saying the amazing thing again, he was whatever days old when he realized, wow, the conductor is the only person who doesn't make a sound. So it's not their job to do it. It's their job to draw it out of everyone else, you know? So anyway.
So it's fascinating. I'm not sure, I'll have to look this article up and put it in the show notes, because I read it this weekend. It was in the Wall Street Journal, and it was about a conductor. And the crux of the article was about letting go. Mm-hmm. And so he was working a piece that he had written with the orchestra that he conducted. And there's a section in the middle that is really hard. And they worked it, and it just wasn't going anywhere. And he finally said, all right, let's try something. When we get to K in the score, position K, I'm going to stop conducting. And I'm going to just keep my hands down until we get to M, or where the out point was of that section. And then I'll pick it back up. and they had worked it for a week, 2 weeks, I don't know, a long time. And they tried this thing, and he stopped, and they played that section perfectly without him messing it up. And then he picked it back up when he had to and took them to the end of the piece. And it was a big epiphanal moment for him. And the article was, of course, about leadership and about when to step away and, you know, not try to force the thing or conduct the passage that is really hard, and trust and empower the people that you've employed to do those jobs to actually go do those jobs. And I thought that was a pretty fascinating story. Because as leaders, letting go is a thing we don't often do.
Sure.
Yeah. That's I was in high school, I was in the Colorado All-State Choir, and you get your cassette tape of your rehearsals, you know, your rehearsal tracks.
Right.
So I dutifully learned my first alto parts, and you come together and you only have like a few hours of rehearsal with this whole new group and this new director before you perform. Right. And there was a song that was an a cappella song, and we were having trouble staying on pitch, kept going flat. And so he asked us to, and it was, I don't know if it was the whole piece, but it was a substantial part of the piece where we started our, you know, had our initial notes. And he said, I want you to sing it in your head. Don't vocalize anything. I'll conduct, but I just want you to hear your part in your head. And so we did our opening, you know, chord, and then he took us through whatever passage it was, 24 bars or whatever. And then he had us sing, right, the final note, and we were spot on.
Dead on.
It was such an interesting thing, right? About the trust piece of like, you know your part, and I'll keep the beat for you. You just, right. We just got to keep it all together. Like everybody just contributes what you already know how to do, and we're good. So yeah, a kind of a variation on the theme of the trusting the individual to know what they're doing and get to the right outcome. That was very powerful as a 17-year-old, you know. I was just blown away.
That's amazing. That's terrific.
Yeah. I also was going to bring up, you talked about a follower, right? And that leadership piece about it's not a leader assessing their own value, competence, abilities, impact. It's what the followers think to a large degree, right? And so that was interesting that Gallup, you know, they have their strength-based, you know, research and learning your strengths and strength-based leadership and all of that. But they had a whole different spin on it where they developed this whole thing about the followers' needs, right? And so it was asking the followers, what do you care about? There's all of this stuff about what leaders should do and what makes a good leader and all of this. And so they turned the research on the followers, and they came up with, right, the consensus on the 4 things were trust, compassion, stability, and hope. Right. And that those were the 4 needs of the followers. And so then the strength-based leadership is how do you meet them where they are? How do you provide? What does compassion look like? What does stability look like? What does hope look like? Trust obviously is always the secret sauce in any relationship. But so I enjoyed, you know, learning that framework from the followers' perspective too.
So say those 4 things again, Lori, just so we have them on record.
Yeah. Trust, compassion, stability, and hope.
And hope. Yeah. We'll see how that overlaps with Mr. Hunkins' framework here.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that, Lori. The sense of, and it's also recognizing that for folks that compassion, stability, hope, and trust will look different. You know, there's not a one size fits all to everything within that. You know,
it's very contextual. What does it look like in a startup compared to, you know, multinational conglomerate kind of thing?
Yeah. And one thing that's interesting is I know I was talking with a colleague about this. We both coach and we both do talks, and we're talking about how often, and you probably have both had this experience, and you as well, Laurel, where is if you ask someone, if you like are in a coaching session and then you say, so what really stood out for you? What really landed for you? And what they share is complete. Like, really? That was that.
Right.
That's the thing. Really, Because again, otherwise we tend to fall into the advice trap. You should do this because that's what it worked for me. If it worked for me, do it this way. And but we're shackled to our own frame of reference. And so by the willingness to offer things out and let people pick and choose, again, trusting that adults are well-intentioned, autonomous beings who, if they can connect to a shared sense of purpose, will give all of that discretionary effort, and they want to come up with their own solutions, but their solutions are not going to be your solution or my solution. It's going to be their solution. And that's okay. And that is okay. Exactly.
Yeah. Celebrate that.
Exactly.
We don't have to do it all. Yeah. I dropped a link in the chat to just a kind of a landing page around those followers needs on the Gallup website.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I want to get into the book, and Alain, when I get a book, the first thing I do, because I've written a book, is I go and I look to see who wrote all the opening blurbs. Like, who did he corral into writing a blurb for him, right? And the lead blurb here is Dan Pink, who's one of my favorites. I thought that's fantastic. He got not only Kouzes but Posner. He got both of them. So Leadership Challenge is a staple in my repertoire. Yeah. So loved seeing that. But Lori, I don't know if you know this, but Sidney Finkelstein, an emeritus alumnus of the Bartender here, and Lori's professor at the Tuck professional program.
Yeah, he wrote Super Bosses, along with a whole bunch of others. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah. Small world, man.
So I saw Sid from the Sidcast in there. That made me really happy because he was a phenomenal guest. If you haven't seen it, check it out. TCB episode with Sid Finkelstein. It was fantastic.
Nice.
So cool. So Alain, you did research leading up to the writing of this book that led you to believe that the current state of leadership was less than stellar.
Yes, it's true.
So what were some of the things you learned in that process that you said, oh boy, this problem is probably a little meatier than I maybe have initially thought?
Well, it's interesting because it's certainly meatier, but I think I had the hunch it was meaty already. And here's why. So the book was not, again, just for the listeners here, my background is not, I'm not an author who sits in his office and writes, like, what do I think about leadership in abstraction? All of this came out of me being a practitioner. So I started back in 1997 as a leadership trainer, management trainer, facilitator, working in, let's call them Fortune 500 type companies, mostly mid to large companies. And for the first number of years, I had no business experience, none. Okay. So I was just asking, ran like 3 or 4 different experiential training programs, but I would meet with clients and ask them about them and their business. And what I started doing, because I was working with 8 to 10 to 12 different clients a month. I was on the road all the time for the first number, like 10 years. And what I started seeing, surprise, surprise, were patterns, right? So it turned out that all the best leaders tended to do things in common, and all the worst leaders tended to have things in common. And so I was studying all this, and then so I had kind of my gut instincts, and then I started doing some research. Yeah. And then the research kind of corroborated the evidence, which is in general, the state of leadership is poor. And in the book, I cite a couple of different things. But so, for example, the study that I mentioned in the book, and there's, many people are familiar with like the Edelman Trust Index, for example, and EY put out a thing, but basically about 50% of employees tend to trust their employers, right? And that number kind of goes up and down a little bit, but still, we're talking, it's half. That's a significant shortfall. About 31% of people believe their leaders communicate well. That came from Ketchum Communications. And about 23% of people think their leaders overall lead well. And so
just pause right there. Say that one again.
Yeah. 23% of people believe that their leaders lead well. Only 23%. And so I have shared that number, and I've gotten that very similar reaction from many groups over these last couple of years. And people say, how can that be? Don't people tell their leaders that you suck? I'm like, time out. Let's just think about that for a second. In most hierarchical organizations, which your leader is usually higher on the hierarchy than you are, how come if they have not, again, assuming they don't lead well, it's a pretty good chance they haven't created the safety where they're really asking for open and honest feedback.
I was going to say,
therefore, you were to say that, that would be called a career limiting move. So you don't do it, and you think it, know it, your colleagues think it, know it, but no one says it. And because the organization doesn't really do much about it, it festers. And I am amazed. I mean, I think this ties into, again, Gallup says that something like 14 to 15% of people are fully engaged at work. I mean, I think these numbers, there's no accident that you have similar numbers in these areas, because let's face it, if you have to kind of get on with getting on, or, you know, your daily mantra is, it is what it is. You know, if that's your daily mantra, you're just kind of getting through it, you know. So, and then, you know, they call that quiet quitting these days, right? And so in any event, yeah, the state of leadership is pretty poor, and most people are notoriously bad with self-awareness, right? So most of us tend, like, in much in the way we think, 95% of us think we're above average drivers. You know, if we had a room of 100 leaders and said, raise your hand if you think that you're a decent leader, my guess would be the majority, if not close to 100%, would say, because of course everyone intends to. No one's waking up thinking, I want to make people's life miserable today. No one's thinking that. They just happen to do it, and they don't even know how or why. And it's because they have inherited all sorts of bad habits that they don't even realize they have.
And as abysmal as those numbers are, and they're abysmal,
yes,
right? I have to believe those are underrepresented, because if I'm a disengaged employee, the last thing I'm going to do is fill out a fucking survey about how effective my boss is or how fucking engaged I am, because I'm not.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So the people that did fill them out are probably not the worst off in those situations.
Yeah.
So those numbers are even bigger.
Yeah.
So you identified a problem. And you developed a framework. You call the book Cracking the Leadership Code. Why do you call it that? What are you cracking here?
What am I cracking is because, well, it goes back to what I said before. This idea that the code are patterns of behavior, is that I believe that at the end of the day, leadership is a performing art. To go back to what we were talking about earlier, and what I mean specifically by leadership as a performing art, it's what we say and what we do. Now, obviously, our mindset, our beliefs, our attitudes inform that. But the fruit of all of that labor is what we say and what we do. And so cracking the code is, if we can reverse retrofit this and think, okay, so what are the behaviors? What are the things that we need to say and do that will then net out? Now, again, you can't fake this. You can try to fake it, but people are going to smell out BS for what it is. But if you're genuine, like, okay, so what are the meta skill behaviors that people need to do in order to be successful? And this all came out organically. I started blogging in 2011, and over the course of the next 5 years,
before blogging was cool.
Before blogging was cool. And over the course of the next 5 or so years, I had about 300 blog posts, and I started reviewing them all, looking for common themes and meta trends. And what I found were, I kept showing up like, what am I writing about? You know, what am I writing about? And what I found were the 3 secrets to building strong leaders, looking at what they were. So what are these 3 behavioral meta skills, of which there are sub skills that you can actually do? The first one is connection. So what great leaders do is they recognize, I don't care if you work in high tech or pharmaceuticals or manufacturing, you are in the human being business, and you need to connect with human beings, because, you know, as you all know, so much of the research shows that, you know, at the end of the day, the number one thing that makes people feel engaged and productive at work is, do you feel valued and cared for by your immediate supervisor, you know, which is another human being, right? Yeah. Which means that, you know, we are all in the people business. And I oftentimes tell groups when I'm working with them is realize that, you know, we get so hung up on all of our KPIs, right? Our metrics, our key performance indicators, and realizing all of those KPIs are only lagging indicators of the behaviors of people.
Yeah.
Right. 100%. That's all that. It's what they are, but they're much easier to measure, because it's like, we think that if
humans are messy.
Humans are really messy. So the first skill is connection. And there's a whole bunch of things that go into things you can do to be a better connector. The second meta skill is communication. So basically, what are you doing to make sure that people are walking away with mutual and shared understanding? And I like to tell people that you should assume the default setting for human communication is misunderstanding, and act appropriately. Right?
100%.
And act appropriately, right? And the reason that's so important is because shared understanding becomes the platform on which we're going to make all of our decisions. So if we have a solid foundation, we're going to make good decisions. If we have a weak, wobbly foundation, we're going to make some poor decisions. So what are you doing to ensure you are making everyone walk away on the same page? Easier said than done, because there's all sorts of cognitive biases that would lead us astray. And then the third meta skill is collaboration. So as leaders, we are chief architects. We are designers of environments. And I got some really great ideas from the world of behavioral economics around this. I thought there, there's things that we can do. So for example, if you want people to eat smaller portions, serve your food on smaller plates, for example, right? So what are you as a leader doing to nudge or tweak the environment so that people can perform at their best? And what I found in my research was that there's 4 key elements that need to be in place for people to perform at their best. They're all important. One is safety. So that's going to be physical, emotional, psychological safety. The next one is energy. Do you have an environment where people are energized rather than drained? The third one is around ownership, that people have a sense of autonomy, that they can control their own work environment and work towards it. And the fourth is around purpose, that people believe that what they're doing matters. And so if we go back and look at connection, communication, and collaboration as those 3 meta skills, what I really wanted in this book was to get across the sense that if you want to be a better leader, don't worry about being a better leader, because you can't really do that. What you can do is focus on be a better connector, be a better communicator, and be a better collaborator. You do those things, you will be a better leader. And so the idea is to kind of pull in a lot of research, but put it in a way that is hopefully elegantly simple. And, my target audience isn't necessarily interested, like you said, thousands of boring business books. Like I wanted something that was engaging, practical, story-driven, yet people had walk away specific action items and tools by which they could then go, oh, that's a really good idea. I can do that tomorrow or even this afternoon. And so that's really kind of the origins of kind of where things came from. And then the 4th section of the book, which precedes the 3 C's of connection, communication, collaboration, is context. Also starts with a C. But what I really wanted to get into was some of the history of how did we get here at this point in, the late 20, or I should say, moving from the 20th century into the 21st century, really taking a look back at how we have inherited so many bad habits of the generations of leaders that have come before us. And unless we stop and recognize where we come from, we can't change to where we want to go to, because it is a very different roadmap. I mean, particularly with the pandemic. I mean, the funny thing is the book actually was published on March the 24th, 2020, which was the week the world went crazy and shut down. And so people said, oh, it's so prescient that you wrote these things. Did you know this? No, I didn't know it was coming. But the fact is, these are fundamental principles and they are timeless, and they are just even that much more important in this post-pandemic world that we're trying to figure out as we go than it ever was before.
So I love how the focus on behaviors, right? Because we talk about that a lot with our leadership and with employees around giving and receiving feedback, right? That vague statements about you did really well or you really screwed that up, completely without value and just damages the relationship.
Completely.
It's behavior. What did you do or say? What did you not do or say that had an impact? Not your intention, but an impact, right? And closing that intention impact gap is always the goal, right? And so having all of this put in context to behavior, because then it's not a judgment on your character, it's not a judgment on your motivation necessarily, right? I mean, like you said, you can't fake it. People will figure that out, right? They'll sniff out the BS. But generally speaking, like I want to do a good job and I don't know what to do. Well, it's behavior, do and say, right?
Completely. And Lori, as you say that, what that reminds me of, for those that aren't familiar, like in the world of acting, if you're acting in a play, when you're rehearsing the play, the director's giving notes at the end of a rehearsal. You have like pen, sometimes depending on the pages and pages of notes. And you have to recognize, first of all, these notes aren't about me, Alain. They're about Alain, the actor, the character. It's the character in the play. And it isn't how I feel or don't feel. Isn't the point. This is feedback. We're trying to make a collective work product that's better. And you just get really used to that. And I like to say that actors have this incredible paradox of, on the one hand, you have to have a thick enough skin. You don't take any of this stuff personally, but you have to have a thin enough skin that you have to let it in and actually absorb and make the appropriate changes. And that's just, but the expectation, of course, like, why would you have a rehearsal without notes? Like that would be insane. You would never do. Like
everybody just walks away and goes, "That's all
like,
right."
That was okay. And you just think about how often
that I forgot those 6 lines.
But just how often in the business world, like we finish up a meeting and we never talk about it again. We never talk about process of what went well, how could it get better. And it's so interesting because I do a lot of coaching where sometimes I will sit in on leaders' meetings and give specific feedback. And I can get paid, but it's all about specificity, like you're saying, Lori. It's all about observation. This is what you did. So, for example, when you started the meeting and you jumped into the first point, you didn't stop and give the big picture up front. Right. Next time would be even better if you gave the big picture, so everyone had that moment of context to be on the same page before you jump into that. Oh, right. Yeah. So that's something you can do. That's a very tangible, tactical thing you can do. So yeah, that's what made me think about that, Lori, was that sense is very connected to that.
Nice. That's awesome.
Well, you know, I love the model. And as a practitioner of workplace relationships, right? I mean, that is what makes SkyTeam. It's all about relationships. So the connection component in your framework is all about empathy, right? And empathy is your connection superpower. How do you become more empathetic? You know, I work a lot in technology with folks who they were really good software developers, really good engineers, and as a reward for being a good engineer, they are now leading people.
Yes.
And they kind of
ain't nobody happy about that. Not even an engineer.
Yeah.
They're not super checked into their whole, empathetic toolkit. So what sort of quick words of wisdom do you have for folks who are trying to build that empathy muscle and be a more empathetic leader?
Great question. So there's a couple of places I would start. The fact is, as human beings, even if you're an engineer, by the way, you're still a human. I hate to break it. You're wired to be empathetic. And the fact is, you do have empathy. The thing is, the challenge for many of us is that we have empathy in different levels of concentric circles. The idea is that those that we love and care for the most, maybe, hopefully, it's like your kids, maybe, kind of are in that circle. Maybe close friends are a little bit further out. But as you get further and further away, we have less and less empathy. Now, put it into a work context where we now have deadlines and problems and time, limited pressures and all resources and hierarchy and status and ego. Whoa, suddenly empathy can go out the wayside very quickly. So the first place I would start is, if I think about, I write about this in the book too, like what are the biggest barriers to leading with empathy? And I think for many people in a work setting, the number one is time. Right. Number one is time, because we are always under this pressure. And, I'm not going to go into all the brain science here, but basically when we're having that kind of pressure, we are activating our older parts of the brain, which means that our prefrontal cortex, which is the creative, problem solving, innovative part, goes offline because it doesn't get to compete with the cognitive resources. So if you're in a highly aroused, stressed place, you are not in a good place to really understand how people are ticking. So the first thing is, and many of our organizations, our core, we might have a core competence is drive for results or bias for action. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm not against results. I'm not against action, but we shouldn't be driving for results at the expense of driving over people who are trying to work with us to deliver those results. So the first thing I would do is, first of all, check in with your body. This is actually very much of a somatic experience. So I would say, take a breath or 2 or 20, right? To start to slow down, because while digital work may travel at the speed of light, humans travel at the speed of humans. And so we need to learn how to slow down a little bit. Because one of the things that I find a lot of leaders do is we confuse efficiency with effectiveness. And there is a time and a place to go slow. And so when you're checking in with somebody else, first, you got to get yourself more embodied. And I'm sure you all do this as coaches, right? The sense of like, what do you need to do to prepare yourself for a coaching session? Same thing as a leader. What do you need to do to prepare yourself for a conversation? First, I need to kind of embody the presence of, I have time and space to actually listen to this person, as opposed to having my agenda that I need to steamroll and get through, and it's always interesting if you listen to people's language. I remember I was working with a woman who was she was the head of marketing for a company, and she was giving a marketing presentation to all the leaders. And I asked her, she was part of the way through. I said, how do you think it's going? It's going great. And how do you know? Oh, it's because I only have 8 slides left and we still have 12 minutes. That was her measure of it was going great. Right? It's like, this is just a thing to get done. Yeah. And unfortunately, too often, this is going to sound so obvious when I say it, but too often we look at other people as tasks to get off of our task list.
Sure.
And we have to recognize that, part of it is when you want to empathize, you need to connect with them at the human to human level. So take some time to engage with people just to get to know them as people, right? And so that isn't just small talk. It's like, find out what's interesting to them. And I call that listening with purpose, which is very different than the way most people listen, right? So
listening to respond,
right? Listening to respond, or listening to correct or fix.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's listening with purpose. Is like, my agenda here is to connect. It is to engage. It's to make you feel valued, which means that I probably should be doing no more than 15% of the talking, right? I should be asking some really juicy, open-ended questions and then shutting up and being present to you, that you go, wow, I feel like there's no one else in the entire world here except you with me right now. I mean, the classics, everyone talks about Bill Clinton that way, right? I'm sure you've all heard stories that everyone said, like, doesn't matter, you feel like he is the only one in the room. Like, that is a gift, but doesn't mean that we can't all flex those muscles a little bit more. So the first thing I would do is breathe, be present, park your agenda, and set an intention of, my goal here is to connect, and have that be your sole agenda for the next 2 minutes. Ask a really great, juicy, open-ended question, and then shut up and listen, and then affirm and validate in your response.
And I was just going to say what I love, because not to pick on engineers, maybe it's pick on engineers, right? A lot of times there's this need for absolute accuracy, or the right answer, or right, or I know more about this than you do, and let me tell you. And what I'm always reminding people is that somebody can have a completely different perspective and be deeply passionate about that objective, and you can still acknowledge that that is true for them and they are deeply passionate about it without agreeing with them. That's not the point of this exchange. The point of this exchange is for them to hear heard and understood, not for you to agree with them. And you can get so much further if you can just cover the acknowledgement of, this is what's true for you, right? And resist the urge to correct, or, well, actually, right? That that we do.
And it's hard because it's kind of counterintuitive. It goes against how many of us were educated, right? In school, there was a right answer, there's a wrong answer. So we get very good at binary thinking. And as leaders, we have to learn how to embrace paradox and paint in shades of gray. We really do.
I love it.
And we hire you to go to Congress and talk about binary thinking.
Well, there's a whole lot there. Good luck with that one.
So I've collected so many things here today. I've got listening with purpose. I've got digital work moves at the speed of light, but humans move at the speed of humans. I love that. We're shackled to our own frames of reference. And my favorite, kindling the fire of brilliance. I love it. His name is Alain Hunkins, and the book is Cracking the Leadership Code: 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. If this whet your appetite, Alain, where can people find you, and where can they acquire this fantastic work?
Fantastic. Yeah. Best place to find me is Alain Hunkins, ALAINHUNKINS.com. There is a page that's resources. It's got a link where you can buy the book wherever books are sold, including the big place that keeps Jeff Bezos happy. And if you like it, leave a review. Certainly there too. And if you listen this far into the recording, you are now part of the end of the Corporate Bartender episode 174 club. You can email me directly at alain@alainhunkins.com, and I'll answer all queries received.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for being here with us today. This conversation was fantastic. I think we're going to need a part 2, because I've got deeper questions that I didn't even get to. And we didn't have the interference of 12 other people on the call today. So it was a good...
And I only interfered once.
I know you did. And it was a beautiful interference that you did do. All right, let's get into our funny things, good feel story, and silly cocktail. And then let's go have some dinner, because I have stuff prepped and in the fridge ready to be grilled.
That's
Aren't you the overachiever?
I know. Funny thing number 1, when you sneeze so hard, your mustache changes lips. That guy did that on purpose, and I thought that was hilarious.
Some facial art right there.
This next one is from the Sage Wisdom Department. I golfed with a hilarious 78-year-old man, and he was dishing out life tips the whole time. The most dope guy I've ever met. He tells me after the round, don't talk to me in the parking lot. My wife's picking me up. She thinks I went deaf 5 years ago. What a legend. Funny thing number 3, just told a guy talking on his phone in the library to shut the fuck up, and everyone applauded me, so I told them to shut the fuck up too. Funny thing number 4, when the DJ drops Thriller at the wedding. And funny thing number 5, my favorite funny thing of today is a Hulk Hogan one, and it goes along with this song. Oh, hey there, brother. All right, today's good feel story is it's checking in on one that we ran a couple of years ago. It's about the oldest lobster fisherman in Maine.
Yeah. Finally tonight, one woman who proves age is just a number. CBS's Steve Hartman goes.
103 years old.
That's incredible.
That's bananas.
Her sweet voice is like all of my aunts in Maine.
Yep.
Line them all up.
So I pulled that one for you, Lori, because we're going to be in Maine next Saturday for a week of decompression and relaxation.
And
I pulled this one for right. I pulled this one for you too, Lori, because we watched the hot dog eating contest on July 4th. We happened to be sitting at a bar having tacos for lunch, and they were showing the Nathan's July 4th hot dog eating contest, where the reigning champion has a personal best record of eating 76 hot dogs in 10 minutes. This one seemed much more appealing to me. This cocktail, today's semi-quarantine cocktail, is called Always Have Pie. It's a riff on the key lime cocktail. You'll need a little pineapple juice. New York City has hot dogs. Key West has this, a little bit of fresh lime juice. It took Josh Mogul 3 minutes and 35 seconds to eat a whole pie. You'll need a little whipped cream vodka. I didn't know that was even a thing, but apparently that's a thing. When Josh was asked about his strategy, he said, always have pie in my mouth, which breaks it down to the most basic of strategies. 2 ounces of rum chata. The day before this pie eating contest, the organizers certified a 13-foot key lime pie as the world's largest, a couple of drops of green food coloring. And I want to see Josh eat that 13-foot pie. That's all I got for you today. Thank you so much. Nothing but gratitude for you. Alain, thanks for being with us today. We will get this episode out in a couple weeks. And we will see you all next week.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you had a good time and learned a thing or two at today's happy hour, please share it with your friends. If you want to join our tribe, head on over to skyteam.cloud/TCB or email us at info@skyteam.com. That's SKYE team.com. Thanks again, and remember, you've always got friends at the Corporate Bartender.